Most people believe an empire ends with a thunderous bang, but history suggests it actually ends with a clerical error. In 1944, a group of men in New Hampshire signed a piece of paper that promised the world a stable future, backed by the sheer, unyielding weight of American gold. It was a grand, arrogant insurance policy for the human race. We worked, we produced, and we saved, all in exchange for green slips of paper that we were told would be as good as gold forever. But look closely at the Kazan Summit of 2024. There are no grand speeches about saving the world, and certainly no champagne. Just 30 nations, representing half of humanity, quietly checking the exits. They aren't shouting for a revolution. They are simply moving their bags. It leads to a cold, forensic realization that should unsettle anyone with a bank account. Why exactly are the world's biggest players building a gold-plated life raft, if they don't already smell smoke in the cabin? To understand why 2026 is a tipping point, we first need to dismantle the myth you were sold in economics class. You were told the US dollar is a medium of exchange. In reality, it is the most successful mandatory subscription service ever devised. Think of it like the software on your phone. You don't own it. You just pay for the right to use it, and the terms of service change whenever the provider feels like it. Since 1971, the global economy hasn't been a free market. It's been a forced membership in a system where you provide the labor, and they provide the paper. Before the world went digital, wealth was something you could actually drop on your foot like a bar of gold. But the architects of the modern era replaced that weight with a promise. They created a glitch in the laws of financial physics, the ability for one nation to export its inflation to everyone else. When the Federal Reserve prints $1 trillion to cover a domestic crisis, the purchasing power in your savings account, whether you're in Dallas or Dubai, simply evaporates. You are essentially paying a hidden tax to maintain a lifestyle for a country you might not even live in. It remains the greatest trade in human history. Real cars, real oil, and billions of hours of real human sweat produced by the rest of the planet, all exchanged for green slips of paper that cost the Bureau of Engraving roughly 6 cents to print. We call this global liquidity to make it sound professional. A forensic accountant would just call it an absurd imbalance. For decades, the world accepted this glitch because the dollar was the only rail global trade could run on. There was no other door to exit through. But a subscription service only works as long as the users believe they're getting a fair deal, or at least as long as they don't have an alternative. For 50 years, the United States didn't have to compete. It simply presided. The global South worked harder and harder just to stand still, watching their hard-earned reserves dissolve in the heat of American debt. We've lived in this state of mandatory loyalty for so long that we forgot it was a choice. The American miracle wasn't built on superior capitalism alone. It was built on the world's collective permission for one nation to break the rules of math. But permission is a fragile thing. It lasts exactly until the moment the provider of the system decides to use that subscription as a weapon. And as we're about to see, that moment didn't just happen by accident. To understand why the world is sprinting toward the exit in 2026, we have to look back at a single Saturday in February 2022. For decades, the global financial system operated on an unwritten sacred contract. No matter the geopolitics, your central bank reserves were untouchable. They were the ultimate safety net, the rainy day fund of nations. But on February 26th, the United States and its allies didn't just impose sanctions on Russia. They did something far more fundamental. With a few keystrokes in New York and Brussels, they froze $300 billion of Russia's sovereign assets. Imagine you've spent 40 years working, saving every penny in a high-security vault, only to find out the vault owner can change the locks because they don't like who you're talking to. That is exactly what the global South felt that weekend. It wasn't about the ethics of the war. It was about the cold, forensic reality of ownership. Every central banker from Riyadh to New Delhi stared at their screens and realized a terrifying truth. Their dollar reserves weren't actually money they owned. They were merely permission slips that could be revoked at any time. The message sent to the world was loud, clear, and utterly devastating. Your savings account can be deleted if we don't like your politics. This was the day the dollar died psychologically. We often think of financial collapse as a sudden market crash, a chaotic floor of yelling traders, but real collapse is much quieter. It's the sound of a contract being torn up in a locked room. For 80 years, the dollar's strength wasn't just in the US military or the size of its economy. It was in the perceived neutrality of its plumbing. By weaponizing the very infrastructure of global trade, Washington turned the dollar from a neutral tool into a political leash. The irony is almost poetic. In an attempt to show ultimate strength, the system revealed its ultimate flaw. It is a centralized dictatorship masquerading as a global utility. Suddenly, holding dollars didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like a liability. It felt like walking around with a tracking device that the manufacturer could turn into a detonator whenever they chose. This realization ignited a slow-burning panic among the world's elite. They knew they couldn't just walk away overnight. The dollar was too integrated, too deep, but they also knew they could never trust the house again. The search for an alternative was no longer an academic exercise for intellectuals or conspiracy theorists. It became a matter of national survival. If the old rails could be switched off at a whim, the world needed to build new ones. Ghost rails that operated in the shadows, far beyond the reach of a Washington keyboard. While Washington was busy perfecting the art of the financial leash, A group of engineers in Asia and the Middle East were quietly building a ghost ship. They realized you don't destroy a monopoly by attacking it directly, you destroy it by making it irrelevant. This is the essence of Project Murren Bridge. For 80 years, if you wanted to move money from Bangkok to Abu Dhabi, that transaction had to stop in New York to ask for permission from the US Treasury. It was a bottleneck designed for surveillance. Mirage changes the physics of global capital. It is a platform that allows money to teleport from Shanghai to Dubai without ever touching a US correspondent bank. It's not just faster, it's invisible to the old masters of the system. Think of the current system as a brightly lit highway with toll booths and cameras at every mile. Membridge is a quantum tunnel. It operates on a decentralized ledger where the rules are written in code, not in Washington's policy memos. Accompanying this is BRICS Pay, a messaging system that functions like a shadow SWIFT. It allows nations to settle trade in their own currencies instantly, bypassing the need for the dollar as a middleman. The irony is chilling. By trying to lock the world into a single digital dollar, the US forced the rest of humanity to build a system where the dollar is no longer required to function. The architects of this ghost system aren't shouting from the rooftops. They are simply installing new plumbing while the old house is still occupied. It's a silent migration of trillions into a dark pool, where the threat of sanctions has zero gravity. By 2026, this won't be an experiment. It will be the primary rail for half the world's GDP. If you can't see the money moving, you can't freeze it. If you can't freeze it, your primary tool of global diplomacy becomes a blunt instrument. Hitting a ghost, the search for safety has led the world's biggest players to move their wealth into a digital dimension where the light of the US Treasury simply doesn't reach. But a new set of rails is useless unless you have something valuable to run across them. Something that doesn't lose its value at the whim of a printing press. In the sterile, climate-controlled offices of modern central banks, gold was long dismissed as a barbarous relic, a dusty remnant of an age before we were smart enough to trust algorithms and policy memos. We were told that full faith and credit was all we needed to secure our future. But if you watch the loading docks of the world's biggest ports, a different story is being written in heavy yellow metal. The BRICS nations are currently finalizing the mechanics of the unit, a currency designed to do something the dollar hasn't done since 1971, anchor itself to the physical world. The mechanism is a direct strike at the heart of the fiat illusion. The unit is envisioned as a basket where 40% of the value is backed directly by gold. It's a return to sound money in an era of infinite printing. While Wall Street analysts laugh at gold as a pet rock, central banks are buying it by the ton, reaching levels not seen in half a century. They understand a forensic truth that most retail investors have forgotten. When the global credit card is finally declined, gold is the only money that doesn't require a signature. It is the only asset that isn't someone else's debt. The irony is almost too perfect. For decades, the West lectured the world on the virtues of modern theory, the idea that you can print your way out of any crisis. Now, those same nations are teaching the West a lesson in basic physics. By tethering their system to gold, BRICS isn't just creating a currency, they are creating an ultimatum. They are forcing the world to choose between a digital promise and a physical reality. It's a shift from a rules-based order to a reality-based order. By 2026, the psychological barrier will have broken. If a merchant in Riyadh or a driller in Jakarta has the choice between a dollar that dissolves by 7% every year and a unit locked to the weight of gold, the choice becomes a survival instinct. We are witnessing the return of the adult in the room. Gold doesn't care about election cycles or debt ceilings. It just exists. And in a world of crumbling promises, simple existence is becoming the ultimate luxury. But even a gold-backed system has a predator. As the world moves toward these new rails, the existing empire isn't going to sit quietly in the shadows. The counter-move isn't coming from a bank vault, it's coming from the border, and it's designed to turn the global marketplace into a battlefield of desperation. In early 2026, the rhetoric coming out of Washington felt less like diplomacy and more like a desperate ultimatum. As the BRICS nations finalized their parallel rails, the empire decided to strike back with the only blunt instrument it had left, the threat of total economic isolation. The message was simple: if you abandon the dollar, you lose the American consumer. Specifically, the threat of 100% tariffs on any country moving toward de-dollarization. It's a move designed to inspire fear. But if you look at the forensic reality of a globalized supply chain, it actually reveals a profound, shivering weakness. Imagine a fortress that decides to defend itself by bricking up its own front door while the pantry is empty. That is the essence of the tariff trap. For decades, the United States has traded its printed promises for the world's physical reality: cheap electronics, heavy machinery, and daily essentials. By imposing a 100% tariff on those who refuse the dollar, Washington isn't just punishing foreign exporters, it is placing a massive, suffocating tax on its own citizens. A 100% tariff doesn't magically save the dollar's prestige. It simply means the t-shirt at Walmart that cost $20 yesterday now costs $40 today. The irony is as dry as a desert bone. We are attempting to save the global currency by ending global trade. We are telling the world that the dollar is so valuable that we will destroy your ability to earn it if you don't use it exclusively. To the skeptics and truth seekers watching from the sidelines, this doesn't look like the confident leadership of a superpower. It looks like a hostage situation where the kidnapper is pointing the gun at his own feet. By 2026, the world began to realize that American tariffs were no longer a scalpel used for trade negotiations, but a desperate wall intended to stop a flood that had already reached the second floor. You can't protect a currency's value by making the goods it buys twice as expensive. In our attempt to punish those exiting the system, we have effectively started a siege against ourselves. This desperation from the top only proves how much the ground has shifted, but as Washington tries to build a wall of taxes, they are overlooking a much older, much more human problem. A system is only as strong as the people who run it, and the BRICS alliance is far from a harmonious brotherhood. Behind the grand photo ops in Kazan, the new architecture of 2026 is being built on some very shaky, very ancient fault lines. To truly understand the 2026 landscape, we have to strip away the glossy propaganda of the Kazan summits and look at the friction under the hood. It is a mistake to view BRICS as a unified monolith or a brotherhood of shared values. It isn't. In reality, it is a room full of rivals who happen to share the same problem. If you look at the border skirmishes in the Himalayas between India and China, or the deep-seated economic competition between Brazil and Russia, you see a fragile architecture held together by necessity, not affection. These nations don't have to love each other. They just have to hate the current landlord enough to move out together. They are bound by a cold, forensic calculation. The risk of staying inside the dollar system has finally outweighed the risk of trusting each other. It is a loveless marriage, where the only thing keeping the partners from leaving is the realization that the old house is collapsing. The mechanism of this alliance is purely functional. While Washington assumes that internal bickering will eventually tear BRICS apart, they overlook a fundamental shift in the global South's psychology. These countries are no longer seeking a new master in Beijing or Moscow. They are seeking a multipolar exit strategy that ensures no single capital can ever delete their savings account again. It's a transition from a system of absolute trust in one center to a system of absolute suspicion distributed among many. This is why the friction actually makes the system more resilient. Because they don't trust each other. They are building rails that require no trust, only code, gold, and physical reality. By 2026, the question isn't whether China and India can become friends. The question is whether they can agree on a plumbing system that allows them both to survive the coming flood. But even a functional alliance of rivals faces a moment of reckoning. As the new rails stabilize, the trillions of dollars currently floating in the global reservoir will have nowhere left to go but home. And when the dollar finally repatriates, it won't bring wealth back to America. It will bring the full, unadulterated weight of 50 years of exported inflation. As we approach the horizon of 2026, the question is no longer if the shift will happen, but how it will land on your doorstep. For 80 years, the United States has enjoyed a unique form of financial magic, the ability to export its debt to the rest of the world. Trillions of dollars are currently held in foreign vaults, acting like a massive dam holding back a reservoir of inflation. But as the BRICS unit and ghost rails like MeBridge become the primary infrastructure for half of global GDP, that dam is starting to crack. The mechanism of the 2026 crash is what forensic economists call the Great Repatriation. When a nation like Saudi Arabia or Indonesia no longer needs dollars to buy oil or electronics, they don't just throw those dollars away, they send them back home. They trade them for real assets, for gold, or for their own sovereign debt. This is the silent tsunami. Trillions of green slips of paper, once the world's most desired product, are beginning to flood back to American shores. The irony is cold and clinical. We spent decades telling the world that our debt was their safety. Now that debt is coming back to compete for the same goods and services you buy every day. The crash of 2026 won't look like the 1929 stock market plunge. With traders jumping from windows, it will be much quieter and much more personal. It will look like a $15 loaf of bread at your local grocery store and a stock market that keeps hitting record highs. Not because companies are more productive, but because the money used to measure them is dying. This is the slow suffocation of purchasing power. Most people will be distracted by the green numbers on their trading apps, failing to realize that while their portfolio is growing, the value of the walls around them is evaporating. The dollar isn't disappearing, it's just losing its soul. It is becoming a domestic currency again, forced to live within the same laws of math that it once thought it could ignore. We are entering an era where having $1 million might just mean you're a millionaire in a country where $1 million doesn't buy a house anymore. By the end of 2026, the exorbitant privilege will have officially expired. The system isn't breaking because of a conspiracy. It's breaking because the subscription has become too expensive for the users to pay. As the light of the old world fades, we are left with a final, uncomfortable confrontation. Everything we've discussed, the ghost rails, the gold-backed units, the repatriation of debt, leads to a singular point of no return. It's the moment when you realize that the exit door isn't just open, it's the only thing left standing. We often treat the end of an era as something that happens to other people in other centuries. But the mechanics of history are indifferent to our comfort. The shift we've examined, the ghost rails, the gold-backed units, and the quiet repatriation of trillions, is not a prediction. It is a process that has already moved past the point of no return. The subscription to the old world is becoming too expensive to maintain, and the exit doors are beginning to narrow. You won't find a news anchor telling you when to change your life, because the system is designed to keep you inside until the very last moment. By the time the collapse is obvious, the opportunity to prepare will have been gone for years. We are moving into a reality where safety is no longer a default setting provided by a central authority, but a personal responsibility. The question isn't whether the system will change, but who you will be when the old promises no longer buy the truth. If you found value in this investigation into the patterns of power, leave a 1 in the comments. It's a small signal that you're paying attention. Subscribe to Financial Money History to stay with us as we continue to decode the systems that govern our world. The story is far from over.